everyone. We've got everybody back. We've got just shy of 20 minutes. So please do add your questions. I'm going to...
Not too hard.
Well, and I'll ask the questions if that's all right, because I think that we just need to manage the time carefully. So Leanne, could you explain how WAIS itself exists and survives in this new world? And what do you think its future is really? And what is the role of an organization like WAIS in when these big system changes are happening?
Yeah, goodness gracious, that is a really challenging question to ask. Look, the basic answer is it's really challenging because so we're not an identified peak body. We're not an identified advocacy organisation. So I guess what we would consider as core funding or funding from those areas doesn't come to us because we're not classified as those organisations. So what we currently and probably historically, we rely on the memberships of the service providers. So service providers pay a membership fee. Individuals with a disability and family members don't pay a fee. They can be members and they can make a contribution or a donation, but it's not required. And then we rely on grants, both from a national perspective and also from our WA state government or from other places. So, or, social enterprises or trusts or people that see the good work and say, we'd like you to do some more of this. So sustainability is and always has been a concern for us as an organisation. We've been incorporated for 11 years this year, but we're around a couple of years before that. So we're around, before the NDIS. And one of our co-founders, Marita Walker, is also on the line, or online. So some of you would have got to chat with her at the breakout room. So it is challenging, and our work would be considered in the scheme's terms as a capacity building organisation. And what that then means is you apply for the capacity building grants. Some providers put in extra over and above their membership fees because they see more value, I guess, than others, and others will just simply pay the membership fee. So, yeah.
I know this is a difficult question and you don't need to be too precise, but if you remember that many of the people on this call are in countries where systems are at a very early stage of development or the policy discussions are just happening. You've described a tension between a kind of system-centered, slightly self-protecting, protecting the interests of service providers might be one way to look at it, and protecting an old way of thinking and a more person-centered approach that's the NDIS hasn't solved. What would be, one or two things that you would hope to see change in the NDIS? What would be the kind of, what are maybe some of the live battles that people are having now to try and shift that tension to a more positive direction?
I think one of the big things has been around NDIS had a lot of input by people with disability, and I guess right at the beginning, and I guess co-design, co-creating, co-producing at all levels, I think is the NDIA acknowledges that could be better, and there's a commitment to do that better, but somewhere along the line some of that got lost. As the agency grew, that became more challenging because there's so many siloed areas within the agency that may not connect. So relying on the people who the system is going to serve and also impact on if they get it wrong need to be a part of those, absolutely have to be a part of the development of But as we know, within a large system, sometimes it's just getting some jobs done, and then consultations can occur, but not necessarily co-design. So that's definitely probably a big element. And I think, there's probably so many things that could be better. But that's probably the biggest one that's really, and it is hitting home right now. You know, the agency over the last 12, 18 months is really saying we have to get better at co-design, because what we'll do is we'll come to you with a policy, or we'll come to you with how we're doing it, and then you guys keep going, no, that's wrong, like involve us and pay for us to, not me, but, you know, pay for people's contribution and value that as part of designing a system that is needed. I think there's also, you know, it's really hard to develop legislation that has never been, you know, for a system that's never been before, and then working out, you know, 3, 4, 5 years in, going, oh my goodness, is that the interpretation of that piece of the act? Like, how are we paying for that now? That's not the intention of what that piece of legislation was for. So there's huge amounts of capacity building needed within the agency and its partners around culture, intention, focus, and interpretation and implementation of the NDIS. I know that's big level stuff, but it's just, you know, that all trickles down to how it affects people. And then, of course, then people who are unhappy are going to reviews and going to court, and then NDIS is having to respond to that, and then it just becomes a big mess for everybody.
Yes. In fact, I think Petri put a question up, which you told me maybe wouldn't be fair to respond to, but I think it's an interesting one to compare this with Marsha Marshall's discussion of the New Zealand system, where actually her organisation, Mana Wanui in Control, by providing technology as an intermediate way of bringing resources into people's lives, has probably kept at bay some of the bureaucratic build-up that I think you saw. I mean, I think it's something for people to think about. If you might aspire to a new national system, and there are lots of good reasons for that, but in practice, really, the federal,
you want local.
You just built a whole new bureaucracy in Geelong, didn't you? Really, like, it was just a huge system with all of the inevitable, all the things that go with building a big bureaucratic system from scratch, really. And in a way sweeping away a lot of other structures which may have had their imperfections, but ecologically it's a very severe strategy. It's kind of ground clearance, isn't it? And then thinking, oh well, we'll get it right now, but it's challenging, I think, in design terms to do it that way. But there is this general issue that the disability community does want big national systems to provide portability and security, doesn't it? So these are always two very important issues. People want to say, that's my budget, it's secure and it's funded from the best place, and I'm free to move around wherever I want to. And these are very important human rights issues. Yeah. Gail's asked a question, which is coming from her experience. She's talking about in Scotland, there are a lot of people who have been moved into communities, into care homes, sometimes into worse than care homes, many, many miles from home, sometimes not in Scotland anymore. This is a problem we have in England. I think Gail was just asking, have you had that same kind of displacement history in Australia with people moved out of their communities? Has NDIS helped to bring people back home to their communities?
Yeah, short answer is yes, it's definitely been a part of our history. Particularly, so some of my work many years ago was in providing emergency support through our state government for people that could no longer live at home or stay where they were living. And so lots of people came from regional areas into the city because there was either no services regionally, or the complexity around the person became too great and there wasn't there just wasn't any support for them, so they would be displaced and taken, you know, thousands of kilometers away. So that's definitely been part of it. And then of course, because there wasn't the capacity development within those communities that is starting now with NDIS, there is an absolute commitment by local organisations and the NDIS to say, you know, there needs to be local solutions for people in local areas to keep people on country in their home. But it has also happened within the metropolitan area, but it's been, I guess, there's been elements of suburb moves, but the majority of the big displacement has generally come from people who have been in regional areas having to come to Perth. Yep.
Yes, I remember when I was in Western Australia, that was a big thing, wasn't it? People would say there are no services in the country, and that meant that there was this big buildup of services in the big city. But these are huge displacements then.
So and unfortunately, probably like you, Gail, we, you know, once people came to Perth, got placed into an institution or a group living arrangement, they never got out. They just stayed there for life, really. And we still have people who are either living in nursing homes or have been displaced. Like we had one of our very large institutions only sort of in a process of closing because that provided support to people that had catastrophic spinal cord injuries or other types of, I guess, really quite severe physical disabilities because there was no one else. And so people were displaced then as well. They'd come out of hospital, and some people had been there for 40 years because there literally was nowhere else to go, and they couldn't get back home to south of WA or where their family lived because there was no funding at that point for people that were in that situation. So yeah, it still happens. I think the NDIS has given, I'm hoping that looks different in 10 years' time. You know, when they say about the trajectory of the development of such a large scheme and the capacity development needed within the communities and the understanding and the bringing of services to the communities and people wanting to be there, hoping that happens less, and that the commitment to getting young people in particular out of nursing homes continues, and the NDIS has provided, I guess, a way in which they can get support, some disability-related specific support to do that, but it doesn't mean that housing comes with it, because obviously the support is just the support. There's no, housing still is an issue. I wish I had more around that, Gail, but yeah, no, we're in the same boat, I guess.
So I'm going to now Carmel and Marita are on this call, so they might not appreciate me doing this to them. But I was just thinking we've got just a handful of minutes left, and just thinking about that all three of you from Australia are living through these changes and have got a perspective. Could I ask Carmel and Marita and you, Leanne, to maybe just think about like one piece of advice from the Australian experience for people working in countries who are, generally speaking, at a kind of earlier stage of development around self-directed support? I know that's very vague, but we're all, because everybody's in a slightly different place. But if you were, each of you, to pick out one thing that you would really encourage people in other countries to think about as they start to go on this journey, what might that thing be? I mean, Leanne, we've been talking, so you might want to come in first, but I'm going to, is it all right if Marita and Carmel, if I just throw that challenge at you as well, because you're both very well experienced in, you know, the reality of the Australian experience. So, Leanne, what if you? I know it's an unfair. You don't have to be scientific about
it is.
it.
Look, one of the things that's been really important and continues to be, and in the future I think will be very powerful, is peer-to-peer support. It's people being able to connect with other people and come together, learn from each other, and have just that we're stronger together and we all get each other. I think that's been really, really important as part of the NDIS system, that's been facilitated in some way, informally, formally, all of the above.
Brilliant. That's a great example. So Carmel, could I just pick on you maybe to what would your one lesson for the world be from the Australian experience? You might agree with Leanne, and then you've got to think of something else as well.
Yes, indeed, I do agree with the peer support, very important. This is off the top of my head. I would think that bringing people along in that cultural change, like we had the big movement to create the NDIS and it got going, but a lot of people involved don't understand the philosophy of self-determination, control and choice. And that is white-anting it, and it is undermining it in many ways. I mean, there's a big issue now that the funding is being cut back, which is terrible. But aside from that, I think people haven't understood the philosophy. People have become providers, service providers, and they don't have any idea about really giving co-production or giving people choice and control. It's just the old business as usual. So one piece of advice is to work really hard at bringing people along with the philosophy, the ideals. It's not just the mechanics.
Fantastic. Thanks, Carmel. Marita, what would be your perspective?
Look, I absolutely agree with both the points that Leanne and Carmel have made, and particularly when I was internal to the agency, which I was for 7.5 years. Peer support could come up in any conversation, and we haven't really managed to at this stage be able to have it happening in a system, in a consistent and easy and accessible way. But just to add one more point, I think this is something that Sharon and I discussed. She asked about whether the budgets that people had flexibility, and my answer was yes, but not enough. And the way in which people could have choice, there wasn't enough flexibility, and they could do more if they had more flexibility between different buckets within their budget. So that's something that I would encourage others to keep in mind as they design something, that perhaps even a bit less money, but more flexibility. You're less likely to have a life of service instead of a life in the community.
Brilliant. I think those are 3 fantastic and important answers. I'm going to cheekily add a 4th thing to think about, which is one of the strange things about, I thought, the Australian reforms is the way there was very little reference to what local communities could do. And in fact, the local governance structures for communities, which were local councils, were kind of completely absent. And the question that Gail was asking about bringing people back to community seems to me we should be thinking more about community. Maybe it's not so easy, but it can't be just bringing services into community. It must be how communities themselves change, mustn't it? And that links to maybe what Carmel is talking about. The we is all of us, isn't it? It's all of us, every Australian, but every global citizen has to be thinking about inclusion and community and the small places where we live, as well as these big systems, I think. It's been fantastic to have you all here, and I'm very grateful for the additional Australian input from Carmela Marita, but particularly for Leanne doing such a well-organised and vivid presentation and all those great films. I just want to thank everybody for continuing to support this self-directed support network. We hope to continue to build this as a kind of hub for global learning on these things, which has been something that's been a bit absent generally over the years. And so I encourage anybody who hasn't to sign up to the SDS network mailing list. We'll be continuing to run events. We'll be trying to build our governance to include our friends from Australia into this conversation, as well as friends from Canada, the US, and New Zealand, alongside all the European partners in the next few months. If you have ideas about things we could do to accelerate learning globally on these issues, we'd love to hear from you. Heidi, is there anything I've forgotten or anything else we should say to everybody?
No, not really. Maybe our next webinar will be in April 28th, and then we have Nordic models in discussion. So
yes, fantastic. So come and hear about the Nordic models of self-directed support, 28th of April. This has been filmed and will be online. I think we've got some other films waiting to go online, haven't we? So we need to sort that out, and some other resources that we're sharing. And all of this is part of Citizen Network. If you've not joined Citizen Network, please do. We've got lots of materials about self-directed support on the Citizen Network website. And if you've got examples you'd like to share with the world, we'd love to hear about them, and we will make it our business to share that learning outwards. So thank you all very, very much. And I think it's
thank you for having me.
Yeah, goodbye from us. Thank you, Leanne, especially. Can we do a kind of, I don't know, like a silent applause or something?
Nice to see everyone.
Thanks, Leanne, and thanks
Bye.
everyone for being here.